All right. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to BitTips. I'm Brandon. I'm here with Jeremy Gardner. If you don't know, he was one of the speakers at the North American Bitcoin Conference here in Miami this last week. Jeremy is a disruptipreneur at its finest. He is one of the founders of Augur. He founded the Blockchain Education Network, which sponsors students to go and visit conferences like the North American Bitcoin Conference. He's involved in a number of other projects, and he spoke about some of them at the conference. So nice to have you, Jeremy, and thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Thanks for having me.
So the first thing we wanted to talk about was how you actually got into crypto. Could you get into that a little bit?
Like many of the people involved in the industry early, I first heard about Bitcoin because of the Silk Road. The Silk Road was this online kind of black market, Amazon.com on the dark web that, caught the imagination of many people, not those that are just libertarians or cypherpunks, but people that, like drugs or just think the black market is fascinating.
Yeah.
I read about it in Rolling Stone in 2011. I figured out how to get Tor and go on the Silk Road. But the whole Bitcoin thing was stupid to me. It's like, what's this crazy internet currency that's volatile, that's hard to buy? It never actually explored Bitcoin itself. It wouldn't be until 2013, a couple years later, when Bitcoin had risen to about $100, $200, that my friends were saying, go buy Bitcoin, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, what is this? I started to look at it. I looked at the order books of Mt. Gox. I was like, all right, this actually makes sense to probably buy some. Yeah. So I put a few $1,000s in. The price went up to $1,000 in just a couple of months. I was like, this is some crazy pump and dump, and sold it all. And forgot about it for the next couple of months. But in that same time, I kind of fallen out of love with the world of politics, which is what I thought I was going to go into after college. And when I transferred to the University of Michigan in the winter of January 2014, I happened to move in with a young Bitcoin enthusiast. They convinced me to actually learn about the technology and understand the fundamentals driving the value behind it. And that's when I kind of caught the Bitcoin bug, if you will. And shortly afterwards, I joined the University of Michigan Bitcoin Club because that was a thing. And at the very first Bitcoin Club meetup I was at, a reporter came from USA Today, and she's asking us about our Bitcoin Club. She's asking us about Bitcoin and how much to contribute because I was so new to the technology and the organization. But she mentioned partway through the interview that there were Bitcoin clubs at MIT and Stanford. The political animal in me saw an obvious organizing opportunity, and by the end of that evening, I was on a call with the heads of the Michigan, MIT, and Stanford clubs. And partway through the call, I suggested, hey, why don't we create an organization out of this? Everyone was like, sure, go ahead. And within about a month, what is now known as the Blockchain Education Network was incorporated.
Right. And we personally at BitTips, we're thankful for the Blockchain Education Network. This was actually the organization that we met each other and we formed our team and got to network with other young blockchain enthusiasts to create our club at the University of Florida and then eventually go on to create BitTips. So could you talk a little bit more about how you created the Blockchain Education Network? Because I know that it's not just in the United States anymore. It's really expanded outside of that.
It's funny, when I went and incorporated it as a Michigan nonprofit. I hoped that maybe within a year, maybe within a couple semesters, we'd have 2 dozen chapters around the United States, just a hodgepodge of Bitcoin clubs. That it would be a nice resume booster. But right after we incorporated, within days, Mt. Gox imploded, and all of a sudden Bitcoin was in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. But for many young people, it was the first time they had heard about Bitcoin, and because they weren't invested, they became very fascinated by the technology, and consequently, and as a result of us kind of blasting out what we were doing on social media and talking to whatever press we could about it, hundreds of students reached out to us by the end of that winter semester in 2014. By the end of it, we had over 100 chapters in 20 plus countries on every habitable continent. It was totally grassroots. We were utterly unqualified to be creating such a large organization, but we kind of just rode with it. And we did what we could. We raised some money from companies in the industry, and we built out the website, built out resources, and just allowed young people from around the world to organize around this technology and start their own organizations, which would focus on advocacy, education, research, trading, entrepreneurship. It was very decentralized, much in the same nature that Bitcoin is, and we let people do whatever they wanted, as long as they didn't use our name inappropriately. And that formula worked incredibly well, and as a result, dozens, if not hundreds of startups have spawned out of this nonprofit. So many of our students have gone and joined companies in this space. Billions of dollars in enterprise value have been realized as a result of many of our students' endeavors. It's been really extraordinary to see.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever think that you would have this level of impact on so many individuals like ourselves, even with the Blockchain Education Network?
Certainly not with the nonprofit. I mean, it's always been my life's hope that I could have a large positive impact on the world. Ever since a young age, I knew I wanted that. But when I got into Bitcoin in 2014, in a real way, Bitcoin was dying. The price had gone up to 1,000. Right. It was slowly collapsing. Mt. Gox collapsed. Charlie Shrem went to jail. By the summer of 2014, most people said Bitcoin was dead. It was back around $300 or $400 and just going down. And so it didn't. When I told my parents I was dropping out of school in August, September of 2014 to focus on this Bitcoin stuff full time, I told them there's only a 5 to 10% chance that this technology is successful, and if within 2 years it hasn't shown that it has the potential to be, I'll go back to school. But if in that 5 to 10% chance that it is successful, and I don't drop out of school to pursue it, I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life. And that's entrepreneurship. You take outside risks for potentially outsized rewards, and that's what I was banking on. So no, it probably wasn't until 2016 that I really thought, all right, this technology is real. It's happening. Mm-hmm. I wasn't willing to say it was definitely Bitcoin or definitely Ethereum, but this whole idea of distributed ledger technology, blockchain technology, it was here to stay. And so it took a while. It wasn't like my conviction was immediate, like many of the early Bitcoin people. Mm-hmm. There are guys that live in this house in the crypto castle. Since 2011, they went all in on Bitcoin, and they just waited, And one of them, he cashed out at 20K at the top of the market because he knew he had been planning for that since it was like 10 cents or $1. Right. But I didn't have that conviction, the second I had money, which was almost a couple years into my time in crypto, it was in late 2015 that I finally had some money to invest. Then I went all in. But even then I wasn't fully convinced. I just knew that as a 23-year-old, I could afford to lose all the money I had made and start over again without much consequence.
Right. And so would you say that you got into it because of libertarian ideologies? Or
not in the slightest.
No?
For the first 2-3 years I was in crypto, I was the token liberal in the industry. I come from the most liberal city in America. My parents are borderline Marxists. I was never taught to value money. I still don't particularly. It was all about doing what's right in the world. But my dad's a professor. My mom makes media for museums. I was never told to go be rich. I was just told to do what I love. Which is a very privileged thing to be told. But I came from a very middle-class family, and it wasn't something I valued. And libertarian ideals were far from what I was raised to believe in. For the most part, the social component, that people should be able to get married, people should be able to smoke weed, sure. But for the most part, I was very liberal. And some of the best arguments of my life have been, I'm about to go to the 5th Satoshi Roundtable, 4th Satoshi Roundtable. But the very first one, I remember probably the best argument of my life, I was pitted at a dinner table and everyone was watching. It was me, Jeffrey Tucker, Eric Voorhees, and Roger Ver. So legends of crypto. and legends of the libertarian movement. And I was going head to head with them against the merits of libertarianism versus liberalism.
Right.
And, as my time in crypto and as an entrepreneur has helped shape me, I've become more libertarian, I'd say. But I still hold very dear some of the core values of liberalism that are totally misaligned with libertarianism. Like, I believe we need taxes, and a lot of the guys in crypto don't. But that helped me carve out a niche for myself in the industry, and it's instructed me in my value set as I've developed as an entrepreneur. When all of a sudden in 2017 I had made a tremendous amount of money from my crypto investments. I took all that money and I poured it into a venture fund focused on the intersection of blockchain technology and social impact, because I had spent all this time saying how Bitcoin, blockchain technology was going to make the world better, which is why I got into this space. But I hadn't seen it happen yet. But the libertarianism component, it's a very, I believe people should have financial sovereignty, especially in the growingly Orwellian world that we live in.
Right.
But it was always about making the world better as a whole and helping people. It wasn't about individualism nearly as much as it was for most people.
Right. I see the libertarian side of it almost like the more decentralized part of blockchain, and like the more liberal ideology is more like human governance side. Because
to me, so it's not about governance. It's about financial inclusion. There are 2 billion people in the world that have access to no traditional financial instruments or resources. Another 2 billion on top of that have very limited access to financial services. That's what was amazing about Bitcoin to me, was the ability to reach those people. Mm-hmm. So it's not governments. It's the same. It's actually and this is what we concluded in that faded argument with Tucker and Voorhees and Bears. So we all had the same mission: is to have a world where everybody has the same access to financial instruments, and they can own their own wealth. That is my goal. But my vision around blockchain technology and crypto assets was that should be a driving purpose, was to ensure that we can alleviate people from poverty, give people the means they can to support themselves today, not have that be a pipe dream and positive externality of Bitcoin and blockchain tech.
Right. And also to help avoid mispractice by federal banks and governments. At the conference, we spoke a little bit about Latin America. Right now in Venezuela, I believe 70% or more of citizens do not have access to legitimate banking services.
Well, you don't even want banking services, because a roll of toilet paper is worth more in weight than the same weight of the highest denomination bill there. Mm-hmm. You're better off rolling around literally a truck full of toilet paper to pay for things rather than any denomination of money.
Yeah.
And so the banking services have totally failed them there, but it's also creating an alternative form of finance.
Right.
I mean, that's the thing, a form of finance that is totally disintermediated from banks and governments. Mm-hmm. And that is the appeal of Bitcoin.
Right. So going back to Venezuela, how do you feel about the petro? Personally, I feel that the government may be trying to mislead the citizens and tell them, we're distributing this coin that is backed by oil and whatever.
It's a total joke. I mean, it's not a cryptocurrency. Secondly, I don't believe it's actually backed by oil. 3, that's open finance for you. Mm-hmm. There's a tool to create new financial systems, and they're taking advantage of it. Right.
$700 million invested in.
Well, they said $7 billion.
But
technology fundamentally is morally agnostic. Mm-hmm. You take the open source code that is Bitcoin or Ethereum, and of course you can use it to create something that's bad, but that doesn't make Bitcoin or Ethereum or blockchains bad. It just means it's technology. I mean, just like, it's just like email can be used to send hostage letters and blackmail people and extort people, commit fraud. Does that make email bad? It's just a tool.
Yeah.
And it's how we choose to use it that determines the morality of the tech. And that's what I focus on with my fund. It's finding the kind of overwhelmingly good applications of blockchain technology and crypto assets, and that's what's so important to me.
So going back to that with different kinds of blockchain assets and use cases for it, you created Augur, which is a decentralized oracle. Basically, it can be used to predict what's going to happen. So you can go on Augur and it could say, will Donald Trump win the presidency in 2020? Or and you know, you could put your currency in and see what happens. So could you tell us a little bit more about Augur? I know my explanation's probably not that great about it.
Yeah, I mean, the best way to think of Augur is it's an unstoppable online betting market that predicts the future. A prediction market effectively is a stock market for anything. You say, will Donald Trump be impeached by 2020? You can buy yes or no shares depending on what you believe will happen. If you have better information, you're probably inclined to bet more. And then what you get is the price. So let's say the price is between $1 and 0 cents. You know, if more people believe he's going to be impeached, it may be 60 cents for a yes share and correspondingly 40 cents for a no share. Mm-hmm. More people believe he's going to be impeached, it may go up to 65 cents and correspondingly 35 cents for a no share. And what you get from that is the probability that the market assigns to the event occurring. That 65 cents per yes share is a 65% probability of Donald Trump being impeached. And what social scientists and statisticians have found is that using prediction markets, using this wisdom of the crowds, is actually one of the best ways of predicting the future. Mm-hmm. The reason why prediction markets previously have not been successful is because it resembles gambling and it pisses off a lot of large nation states. You know, the reason why Max Kaiser's Hollywood Stock Exchange, which predicted the outcomes of box office futures, got shut down was because Hollywood was worried that it was going to hamper their first week of sales on their movies that they knew were going to be flops. Yeah. And so it's really crazy to think about the ramifications of a prediction market, but it goes from Hollywood, it goes from Goldman Sachs, it goes to geopolitics. I mean, when you can create a market for anything, what you're doing is effectively creating the printing press for money. You know, the printing press, what it did was it disenfranchised the clergy, who pretty much had control over literacy, the ability to write, the ability to interpret the Bible. So they used the Bible as a means of control. Right, this is what God says you need to do. This is why you need to pay the church. This is why the wealthiest people and the Middle Ages were the church, because they pretty much had control over the people because they had no ability to read. The second the printing press became available, all of a sudden, anybody who could have access to a book could learn to read, and then they could interpret the Bible on their own, and that's how you get the Protestant Reformation, blah, 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 and Martin Luther, and then the Renaissance, exactly. And then if you look at the modern financial system, it's exactly the same. Yeah. The average individual has no access to creating financial markets, financial instruments, or even participating in financial markets or using financial instruments. We're very limited. We have our E-Trade accounts, and that's really it. We can open a bank account. But you can't even participate in venture capital if you're not an accredited investor. Yeah. And what's so cool about Augur is it's like the printing press for money. You can now create a financial market for anything from anywhere and participate. Like if you're in Russia and China, all of a sudden you can make a bet on the future price of Apple or Tesla stock, which you can't currently do, and now have access to financial markets you previously did not.